Today, we're diving into a player so fierce that when you search his name on YouTube, the top results suggest his angriest and most brutal moments. Sure, he was ruthless on the pitch, but as he himself puts it, that was just the job. However, we're going to explore a different side of his game, which isn't talked about too much. The question we need to answer today is, was Roy Keane as good as he was aggressive? Roy Keane is one of the greatest leaders that football has ever seen. It's not only because of his no-nonsense style of leadership, but mostly because he fulfilled the very fundamental role of being a leader, which was to raise the levels of the players around him. He had the ability to get more out of his teammates, and that's exactly why he's considered to be one of the best captains the Premier League has ever seen, if not the best. But what about Roy Keane, the player? Was he all bark and no bite? That's what we'll look into today and try to pinpoint what exactly made him such a valuable player in his era. When we talk about his era, which was the 90s and early 2000s, football was at the peak of physicality and the so-called aggressive players were worth their weight in gold. Think of similar players like Gattuso and Vieira, who used to channel their aggression to win duels in ways that would make the opposition dribbler think twice about coming too close again. It would disrupt the opposition's game, and the lenient refereeing back then compared to today meant you could get away with a lot more. Roy Keane was in the same category of players with an elite mentality of giving it their all on the pitch simply because it was their job. A regular under Sir Alex Ferguson at Manchester United, he enjoyed a decorated career filled with trophies. Let's take a look at what made him such a special player and why he's the best example of relying on hard work to get better. The Irishman started playing for a local team at the age of 8. He spent almost a decade with his boyhood club before getting the chance to play for a semi-professional club called Cod Ramblers. He was relatively shorter than his peers at that young age, and his resilience to play football professionally was often met with rejections early on. Keane applied to a lot of English clubs as a teenager, but wouldn't get a chance until Nottingham Forest agreed to give him a trial. He was supposed to train and play with the reserves, but due to some confusion, just ended up training with the youth team and returned to Ireland. He got a call back from Forest telling him he needed to come in again because they wanted to watch him play in a match with the reserve squad to judge his abilities. Keane agreed and was grateful for the opportunity, and then Spurs contacted him to offer him a trial as well. Even though Spurs was his favourite team as a youngster, he wanted to fulfill his deal with Forest and went for the second trial. The legendary Brian Clough was the manager back then, and Forest offered him a contract after he impressed the coaches. Clough played him as a box-to-box midfielder, and he managed to get on the end of a fair amount of goals over the 3 seasons. He worked under Clough for 3 years from 1990 to 1993 and improved his game year after year. Even though he couldn't get his hands on a trophy with the club as they lost an FA Cup and a League Cup final, his reputation was gaining new admirers across England. In the 1992-93 season, Nottingham Forest couldn't manage to do enough and they were relegated at the end of the season. Keane's contract contained a relegation release clause for £3.5 million, but an oversight meant it would only be active after the 1st of September, which was after the European transfer window would have already ended. There was a flurry of interest in signing the tenacious midfielder across England, but the two final contenders were Sir Alex Ferguson's Manchester United and Kenny Dalglish's Blackburn Rovers. Keane met with Dalglish first, and after they had contract talks on a Friday evening, they agreed on a wage and were ready to break the British transfer record at the time. But Friday evening meant that the staff from the club office was already gone and they couldn't draw a contract up until next week. Keane went back to Ireland and agreed to return to sort out the contract after the weekend. On Sunday, he received a call at home. It was Sir Alex telling him how he was interested in bringing him to United. Keane told him he had already agreed to sign with Blackburn. Sir Alex asked if he had signed anything yet, and when he said no, the United manager asked him to meet him the next day. He flew to England and was picked up at the airport and driven to Sir Alex Ferguson's house. After a conversation with him, he now had 2 offers on the table. One from Blackburn, which would fetch him £400,000 a year, and the other from United for £300,000. The deliberations went on for some weeks, and after negotiations, United agreed to go to £350,000. Keane agreed to join, and the rest is history. Kenny Dalglish called him a week later and asked him if it was true. An embarrassed Keane said yes, and Dalglish apparently went mad. He gave him a piece of his mind and told him off like no one has probably ever dared to. But it speaks to Keane's character for admitting to being embarrassed about shaking hands and then not following through. But it was really on Blackburn for not drawing up the contract that Friday evening. Keane became a United player in the summer of 1993 and was integrated into the squad immediately. He was supposed to be the replacement for Brian Robson, and in his very first campaign proved his worth. He was key to United's domestic double that season, winning the Premier League and FA Cup. The box-to-box midfielder saw himself as a goal-scoring threat from midfield. He kept his game simple, as Brian Clough had once asked him to, by focusing on controlling the ball well, passing effectively, and running tirelessly. He was unforgiving on the pitch and gained a reputation for being one of the most aggressive players in the game. Yet it wasn't useless aggression, but rather a well-channeled desire to win the ball for his team and perform to the best of his capabilities. The short temper was just his endless passion to win every single game and have no reason for an excuse. He won 7 Premier League titles with the club, along with 4 FA Cups, a Champions League, and an Intercontinental Cup. But when these accomplishments are mentioned today, his only response is they could have won more in his time. That is truly an elite mentality, and it's clear to see that this isn't a facade he carries, but genuinely how he's wired. Roy Keane only wanted to win, and he wanted to win everything. After Eric Cantona left in 1997, Keane was named the new captain of the club. He was one of the senior players in the team now and ran a tight and disciplined ship. But the captain's armband didn't necessarily invoke this discipline, because even without it, he was the same way. He wouldn't shy away from giving it to players bigger or older than him if they deserved it. In 1999, he led United to the first treble by an English club, and it was one of the most memorable campaigns in club football. Everyone remembers Solskjaer's brace in the final minutes of the Champions League final that year, which completed the treble. But an even more remarkable contribution came from the captain in the second leg of the semi-finals. After a 1-1 draw at Old Trafford in the first leg against a strong Juventus side, United travelled to Turin for the second leg. With 11 minutes, Inzaghi had scored a brace to make the aggregate 3-1 in favour of Juventus. The old lady was star-studded, with Conte, Deschamps and Edgar Davids playing as the defensive midfielders and Zidane in front of them. Roy Keane berated his teammates and told them to get it together. He ran non-stop across the pitch and scored the first goal for United. A rash challenge earned him a yellow card, which meant he would be suspended for the final if United were to go through. He took charge of the match and was everywhere on the pitch. A second goal from Dwight Yorke made it 2-2 before Andy Cole scored the third goal to secure their berth in the final. Keane was always up for a fight, and his record of sending offs speak for themselves. He would also hold grudges, as evident from one of the most iconic Premier League rivalries between him and Patrick Vieira. Both of them were physically imposing midfield maestros and hated each other with a passion. Every United versus Arsenal fixture would see them get into some kind of scuffle during the game. It would even start before the game, like that time they squared up in the tunnel, telling each other to watch out on the pitch. Gareth Southgate was at the end of a boot stamp from Keane, which saw him get sent off. So was Erling Haaland's father, Alfie, whose career shortly ended after a brutal kick to the knee from Keane in a Manchester derby. However, it has since been revealed that his career was ruined due to another injury, and it wasn't just Keane's kick. Keane was part of a United side that would send shivers down their opponents' backs before kickoff. The falling out with Sir Alex was the conclusive highlight of his career, after which he left on a free transfer to Celtic in the 2005-06 season. He retired at the end of that season and later tried his hand in management with Sunderland and Ipswich, which didn't work out too well. These days, we get to see a much calmer side of his personality as a pundit. The mentality of an elite player is still intact, as he often criticises the modern game for going soft. Keane has always been straightforward in his views, and the bitter truths he conveys aren't everyone's cup of tea. So do you agree that Roy Keane raised the standards of players during his time at Manchester United? Or was his hard-on approach counterproductive for the team? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.